And first thing we have on the agenda are public appearances, and we have 3 public appearances. And so we are going to start with Lynn Renner. Lynn, you have a seat right there. I think the microphones are already on. Green light.
So I have a letter.
And Lynn, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, so I was going to say I have a letter that will explain a little bit more. Excuse me, sorry, I'm nervous here. My name is Lynn Renner. I have a son, David, who is in 10th grade at Memorial. And I'm here to talk to you about my serious concerns about and disappointment about the level of staffing, the level of SEAs at Memorial this year. He's had great experiences in the past at Muir and at Jefferson, where I felt like staff really understood inclusion and had great support, and he made academic progress. But at Memorial this year especially, I feel like it is just a totally different experience, a very different story. He comes home, so David has CP, he's a wheelchair, and needs assistance, one-on-one assistance with all academics and with his daily living needs. And this year, more than ever, I feel like they just don't have the SEAs available to take care of his physical needs, sometimes I think safety needs, and certainly his academic needs. So I've talked to the principal, I've talked to other staff, I've left messages for Joanne Grassman and others at the district, but I just thought I would come here tonight to let you guys know that I just don't see any progress. And I get automated messages saying that he's been absent from, period 1, 2, and 6, or whatever it is. So clearly they can't even get him to his regular ed classes, and he comes home wet, so they didn't have time to change him, and they're very apologetic. I mean, I guess I don't blame his special ed teacher or the SEAs that are in his classroom. They have said, and I've gone in to observe, where they have kids with very high levels of need and medical need, behavioral need, and so they just feel like they can't get certainly to the academics, and sometimes even to the physical needs of getting kids to the bathroom and others, other needs that they have. So I would just say this is a crisis. Sometimes it feels like chaos in his room, and I would urge you to help provide the funds or the resources that are needed to add some SEAs. So, I mean, for David, that is the difference between being engaged in school, enjoying his day, having his physical needs met, and what's happening right now is that he's spending most of his day sitting around waiting for other kids to be fed and changed. So, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. Yes. Next, we have Chris Carusi, and Chris, you have 3 minutes.
So in my remarks, I actually want to build on what Lynn just said. I'm hearing from parents at multiple West Side schools, at least, that SEA staffing is not adequate this year. That classrooms are having to be evacuated because there's kids who are not making the classroom environment safe, and there's no SEA to help support those kids, so they're just evacuating the room. Or kids who just aren't getting the one-on-one support they need to get through the school day, and they're just leaving class. It's really exciting that we have more equalization aid in the budget than we thought we had. And I would like to challenge everybody on the board to reach out to a cross-categorical teacher at every school that you are responsible for and talk to them about what's going on with SEA staffing and meeting the needs of all of our kids who have special needs at those schools, and to really think about whether it makes more sense to use that extra equalization aid to reduce taxes or to get more SEAs so that we can meet the needs of all the kids in our schools. I think Madison as a community, where on the whole, we would choose the latter. If there's kids who aren't being served and who have special needs, I think our community would rally behind making sure we pay to meet those needs before we cut our taxes, even more than they're already being, before we cut the levy below what we said we would cut it. I want to give you a second challenge, and this relates to the core values discussion you're about to have. And that is that don't just talk about the core values that are being placed in front of you, but also talk about whether or not it makes sense to have a set of core values as they were presented at the retreat for the district. The way core values were presented at the retreat was that they can never be compromised and that they are imposed. This is not a consensus process. And that kind of an approach makes sense in a corporate situation where you might have a CEO or a founder where you're wanting to make sure that you protect and preserve their vision. But it doesn't really seem to make sense to me in a public school district where it's a democratic system. You don't have a CEO whose vision you're trying to protect. You actually have a bottom-up democracy where parent voices and staff voices matter. I worry that if we approach core values this way, it could undermine staff morale even more than it already has been undermined, because again, we'll be imposing things on our staff that they may not agree with. I also worry that imposing the core value of trust doesn't really make any sense, because trust is not something that can ever be imposed. It has to be earned. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least is Jen Greenwald. Jen, you have 3 minutes.
It's like we planned it. I swear we didn't. I want to talk a little bit about things that matter to me. And I'm trying something different. I didn't write a speech, so please be patient. My kids matter to me. Their lives, who they are, what they like, what they need. Ooh. Education matters to me. I am a total learning nerd. I read teaching children mathematics for fun. I don't know why I'm getting, well, I do know. This is an emotional job, and I am incredibly passionate about what I do. And I feel like I regularly have to defend what I do to the people I work for, and I should not have to do that. Where do I live? I'm going to stop talking about me. Actually, I want to say one more thing. When you give me something new, like Bridges or Lexia or Mondo or whatever, I immediately, thank you, Dean, I go through and I find where is the good stuff, because every curriculum has something good. And I look for how can I make this work for my kids. They don't fit in neat boxes. All teachers are not the same. And the presumption that handing me a curriculum is going to make me a better teacher in some way, I think is really flawed. I'm doing this super cool thing on Fridays. We had this crazy snafu with our schedules, and so we decided to do fun literacy on Fridays. So one Friday we spend an hour snuggling in and reading. One Friday we do poetry, because guess what? It's not in Common Core at elementary school. One Friday we have where the kids write something and then they perform. One Friday we have what's called read, plan, and present. And they read for 15 minutes and then they plan something and they present their reading to their kids. None of that comes in a box. That's from me wanting to make my kids' day engaging for them. So where do I live? I live in the world of Mondo and Lexia and Bridges and Second Step and Social Studies Alive and FOSS. I have young colleagues coming to me and saying, where's the creativity in my job? All I do is turn the next page in this manual, and then I turn the next page in this manual. When you talk about core values, I would like you to talk about I would like you to keep in mind that we are not all the same, teachers are not all the same, and kids are not all the same. And you can't interfere with me building relationships with my kids and with me doing what I'm good at. Thanks.
Thanks, Jen. We are then on to our next item, which is approval of the minutes, and these are the minutes for the meeting of July 10th. And is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, Nikki, and second? Dean, thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 7-0. Okay, on to the 2017-18 budget tax levy final update. Mike? Okay, great. Mike and Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
And just for those present, this is a proposed action item for the October 30th regular board meeting. So there is no vote tonight, but is in preparation for that meeting.
Hopefully I won't need these. Okay. Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, every October, we do a couple of financial transactions. The first is certifying a tax levy, and the second is a related item, which is replacing the adopted June budget, the preliminary June budget, with what's called the fall adopted budget or the fall original budget. Those actions, as Mary just said, will be discussed tonight, but actually take place next week. So this is really our chance to kind of preview those issues and discuss them. So no PowerPoint tonight. Just going to try to frame these quickly and leave maximum time for discussion, okay? And per the memo that was in the board packet, I think we would like to start with the tax levy certification, which is this guy. Okay? So let me kind of frame that quickly, and then we can talk. And if you have questions, of course, feel free. So as to the tax levy, mostly positive developments in regard to the tax levy situation, at least since the last time we discussed it, which was the June adoption of the budget. At that time, we had tentatively settled on a 3.97% tax levy increase, which is $298.5 million, so 298.5. Our recommended tax levy tonight is a 2.96% levy increase. So it's down a full percent, or $295.6 million, or just about $3 million less than we were forecasting back in June. The main reason, not the only reason, but the main reason for that decrease in the proposed levy is the results that we received on our equalization aid estimate. Equalization aid and property taxes work like seesaw. When one goes up, the other compensates for it, and vice versa. Equalization aid was estimated to go down 15% in June. As of October 13th, we learned that the loss was not quite as severe, 11.5% instead of 15%. We also had favorable results on our open enrollment estimates, favorable results on our reserve for voucher seats, and all of those combined allowed us to kind of pull back some of those budgetary reserves. So positive news, that combination of positive factors allows us to recommend a lower tax levy. That is in combination with really positive tax base growth. The Madison Metropolitan School District, which is 92% City of Madison, grew very robustly. I mean, you all see the construction cranes, so you know there's a lot of construction and value growth in the area. It was 6.2% growth in the tax base in 1 year, $1.5 billion of tax base growth. This is a very fast growing school district from a tax base perspective. It doesn't look the same as other Dane County districts that are growing in terms of single family residential. Madison's growing, but in a different and I guess more urban way. Anyway, that combination of a tax levy increase less than 3%, which is really the numerator in this equation, and a tax base growth of more than 6%, which is the denominator in the equation, it's really unusual and very positive in terms of A, not a large levy, and B, spreading it out across more tax-based and tax-based payers. So the estimated impact on a median home value of $263,000 is less than $10, like actually $8.50, based on this this proposal. Now, my annual disclaimer: that mathematical calculation is true in the aggregate across the entire school district. Individual home tax bills can and will vary if you added an addition or you were assessed or something. But in aggregate, the impact is less than $10 on a median value home. Last couple comments. When we say it's our recommended levy, what do we mean by that? It means that it supports the June budget as was presented in June. There are no new initiatives being contemplated here. We have a balanced budget, except for the timing difference related to 25, but it's a balanced budget. And this allows, I guess, sort of maximum flexibility for the future in that, in terms of taxpayer capacity. So that's the basis of the recommendation. Ultimately, as you know from the memo, this recommendation does not use the board's full taxing authority. In fact, it's about $3.7 million short of the board's full taxing authority. So that is a variable that this board has to consider that other boards may not be considering at all this time of year. So I will pause there.
Okay.
I think Nikki was first.
Okay, Nikki, then TJ. Okay.
Respect saving money. I respect not having high taxes. I'm hearing from parents, I'm hearing from a lot of people that we don't have enough SEAs. And I'm worried that that's going to affect staff morale. I worry, as I come from a disability lens, it's the way I do. And I'm worrying about whether or not we're meeting our obligation to individuals with disabilities not to raise money in that manner. When people are focusing solely, not being able to focus on academics, but are focusing on basic needs, then doing something wrong. I mean, that's just a personal opinion. I'm never going to be a budget guru, but I'm just saying that we haven't had an increase in special ed budget from the state in 10 years. And I understand the burden it is. Please don't get me wrong, but if we're doing that well, I think that we need to put our money there.
One question first. Just, you said the voucher estimate came in favorable, and if I'm looking at the budget book and it was 20, and now is 40, is an increase of 42, and we budget for an increase of 20. I just want to seek to understand that. And,
It did come in favorable.
Okay.
We had we have 3 different varieties of voucher, and I first of all, I appreciate the point. The correction I'm referring to is actually folded into the open enrollment numbers,
okay.
And I could unpack it
and
for
open
you.
enrollment came through
Right.
favorable, and,
Yes.
and I noticed that, and that was really good news. And,
Yeah.
I was actually, one of the questions I was going to ask was to confirm that, because that was my read, and you confirmed it before I had to ask.
Yeah.
So we can talk about that later. I
Sure.
was just confused. You know, I kind of worked through that same checklist as you do,
Yeah.
and that one was, you know, I was doing that.
Yeah.
A couple comments. You know, when I saw the $3.7 million with, like, I think many people, you know, a few different things came to mind. One was that, you know, the first thing was, well, we can't add classroom teachers. And it was like, damn. Because I think the classroom teachers are our most effective educational investment. But then, you know, and then my immediate reaction to that was also, then we can't do much of anything. And I started thinking, well, there are some things we can do. Among the things that came to mind were, and just kind of throwing these out for consideration, one was adding EAs and SEAs, which has been mentioned by multiple people here. 2 is adding interventionist and/or coaches and/or PSTs and/or IRTs, and those kind of positions in targeted places and for targeted needs. The third is the general area of compensation. And particularly, again, targeted compensation, some things rise to this. I know that we're having trouble with sub-fill. I assume we're still having trouble with that. Our subs have lost benefits and have not had significant raises for a long time. I think that's one place that compensation can go. There's other places that I can't legally talk about where I think compensation might be a good thing to do. So those are kind of, and in the context of when we're looking at, what is our tax levy and what are our tax levy trends, one of the reasons I sent that email asking that question about the trend line was that I don't think the trend line is that we've talked about trying to keep the increase above 4, which is a trend one. And I just kind of partially wanted to indirectly make the point that if we do a low levy this time, our trend line next year is going to be big, almost inevitably, because if we do a 2.37 this year or 2.97, we're going to probably go over 5 next year if we just by trend line. So I don't think trend line is the most important thing. I also don't think we should do the whole 3 points. There's 2 things we can do with the 3 things we can do with the 3.7. We can spend it, we can tax it and bank it, or we can not tax it. I would favor finding targeted uses for about 1.8 of it.
So I'd like some clarification before we get into the specifics on spending. So Mike, I'm looking at the budget publication format report, and I want to understand that better. It's what I'm showing there is with regards to general fund totals, the difference in expenditures between the June preliminary and the fall proposed is an increase of $3,070,000. Is that true?
Yeah, that's the fall adopted budget summary. It's on the second page where we're looking at the details of total expenditures, and this is focusing on the general fund. When we adopted the budget in June, we were at $364.7 million. Now, as we're here in fall, we're at $367 million, or a $3 million difference. And you might think, well, did we do a lot of spending June to fall? And I could see where you might, at first glance, say, geez, you're up 0.84. What's going on? More than half of that is TID 25, that we borrowed $2 million last year. And because a lot of it was construction and tech infrastructure, we only spent $300,000 of it.
So I'm actually
that
looking maybe
moves
at
into this year.
At the instruction line, because instruction is showing a $2 million increase, and overall, if you compare it to the actuals for 2016-17. So as we hear
Right.
these things about not enough SEAs, I'm looking and seeing that there's been an $8 million increase from last year overall, roughly 5%, and that just from June preliminary to fall proposed, we're up $2 million.
That's right. So on the instructional subtotal, we were at 160 was our actual spending last year. In June, we were at 166 was our estimate for this year. And as we actually settle down post-enrollment and staffing, 168. The movement from June to now is $2 million, or 1.23%. So what's going on there, right? We did not hire a single teacher above or beyond our June budget. We did not add a position. What's going on there is simply landing the individual people in their proper step and lane, and that's the turnover of last year's staff being replaced by this year's staff. It's simply the true-up of the actual cost. But there was no it's a policy change, June to fall. That make sense?
Usually when we have the turnover, historically at least, it's been that actually drives costs down as
Sometimes it does.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't, yeah. Yeah, I mean, You can see the general fund totals if you look at that down at the bottom. Last year we spent 347 million. We proposed 364. We've moved that up to 367. There are substantial investments in the general fund in this budget. We know that. When we were doing this budget back in April to June, do you remember we added? We had additional actions, we had final actions, we had an array of adjustments.
Yeah.
We were increasing the unallocated staff, trying to eliminate the outliers on class sizes. We made a lot of investments.
Yeah.
The major movement here on this budget was April proposal to June adoption. June to now, frankly, somewhat minimal. I still think it's a very strong budget.
I'm just, it's, to hear that we're short-staffed and to see roughly an 8% increase in spending, it certainly leaves the question about how about this. My concern is the longer term, is that we have been able to be very strategic about how we invest additional resources that we have, because we have left some room under that cap that then when we identify real issues, not an SAA here or a teacher, but where we can really move and address issues across the board, is because we have left some room. And my concern is that if we don't leave that room, we're shutting ourselves off from real opportunities moving forward to address issues that we know we have. I would say across the board. It doesn't mean every school, it doesn't mean every classroom, but it certainly means significant issues that require significant resources. Dean had his hand up, and then Anna, Kate, and then,
I'd love to chime in at some point after everybody.
is it on the general topic?
Of staffing, yeah.
Well, can we,
I have a feeling
okay.
you guys are gonna
Yeah.
stay on that topic.
Yeah, so Jen, why don't you go ahead?
I'll wait. Let these guys go ahead.
Okay.
They're gonna stay on staffing.
Okay.
Are we gonna, Dean, stay on staffing?
Just go for it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Jen, I'd defer to you. Go first and we'll pick up on after.
This is so
Wisconsin. I know, we're so nice to do that.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, no, Mary, I'm definitely second.
I mean, I guess I'd start with, I'll be following up with you to find out what's happening with your son. But I think, I mean, it's hard to hear stories that there's still need out there when we have continued to invest in staffing year over year, including an additional, I think, about $1 million on the front end before the April budget and unallocated, and then another 500,000 between April and June. I think that I think there are a few thoughts that I have. One is when it comes specifically to special ed and SEAs, this goes to Nikki's comment and yours, TJ. A couple things come to mind. One is we did make some changes in the way we the balance between CC teachers and SEAs. I don't know if you guys remember that going into this year. It was a strategic choice that we made, that we were going to invest. I know not everybody likes that word, but we're talking about money. We were going to invest more in teachers, right? Let's get more teachers, which would just shift the balance between CC teachers and SEAs. And it makes me wonder if that's a little bit of the pain that we may be experiencing and hearing about in the district. So there's that. The second thing is that it's important to remember the way that John Harper and the special ed department works in terms of their allocation, right? They do their kind of front end allocations, and then they make these hand adjustments based on real kids in real time in real schools. And And then if there continue to be issues, they've got some flexibility and they use it to address those issues throughout the year. And we were talking about that earlier today. Where is John in that process? And how is he addressing kind of any remaining issues that we may be hearing about experiencing in schools? And he's in that process as we speak. So there is money in the flow-through budget in particular, and Lisa may be able to chime in on that, to be able to allocate more. We have the reserve. That's why it exists, to be able to address these remaining issues. We just need to make sure that's happening, which we will take on. I think my concern, I mean, we have 1 week before the levy has to get adjusted or established. And we're about to go into a big strategic conversation on staffing in November, right? Where we agreed as a group that we're going to take a big step back. What are our goals when it comes to staffing? We're doing a big, we hired a consultant to help us take a totally new look at how we staff for student services. So inclusive of special ed, but beyond special ed. And I want us to be able to get to that that project this year. So I'm worried about making some short-term decisions to put more staffing in when we're about to go into, I mean, we agree that this is a priority for the board this year. This discussion about staffing and compensation both, which I think maybe gets to your compensation suggestion too, TJ. I'll tell you what my recommendation would be if the board wanted to this is not going to sound as exciting as staffing, so bear with me. But if the board were going to try to use some of these additional resources and not use it all to reduce the levy, it would probably be investing in maintenance. And again, I know that that's not as exciting as the purely instructional stuff, but we do have a plan for ramping up maintenance so that our schools are where they should be in terms of just basic quality. We've been behind for a long time, and I don't know, if we've got a plan for it, we wouldn't be making decisions ahead of the plan, but in consistent with that plan. I just want us to be strategic and thoughtful. And we've got these really important conversations coming up on staffing and comp. And I'm worried about us making decisions ahead of that process. So that was a little long-winded. That's where I'm at.
Okay, thanks. That was helpful because that's a good way of looking at it. I had thought that there were maintenance issues that we could address as part of this opportunity, because I believe there are opportunities here. And my understanding is that leave the levy as it is now would probably be close to double next year maybe, but it would go up next year if I get this, if I have that accurate. So, so that's a good way of looking at it, and I think we should come out of that with a decision one way or another on that particular issue. The other issue that I'm aware of is that on paper we might have the ratio right of cross-categorical and SEAs to the number of special ed based on history. But it might not be accurate based on what's presented at the beginning of the year. And our speaker today noticed and made known to us a clear difference between the experience of elementary and middle school as opposed to high school. So, and that's not, yeah, it's an anecdote, but it's an important one. And you can maybe extrapolate anecdotes out across, and along with some emails and personal contacts we hear. It's not completely accurate, but there are some years when the ratio sounds right, but because of what's being presented to us and the behaviors and the response to it and the staff that's available to deal with these things, it doesn't hit it. We have to change that ratio, maybe school by school. And I think we can understand why the ratio might be right, but some schools might not need it, and other schools might need more. Badger Rock comes to an example. They've had more, so they're gonna have to shift some staff over there to address it. So I don't know where John's at in this analysis. If he's got people he's holding back, it's probably time to bring them in there. And how many of those are there? Can we address our speaker's specific issue with that particular class, because she's been over there observing. This is not just anecdotal, it's backed up with some evidence of that. She's been there and observes this is happening fairly frequently in this particular example, she's saying. So the concern then is that you can extrapolate out, man, if it's happening once, it's probably in some others, so we have to address this. And we have an opportunity here to plug some holes with people that we need, trained up to address this stuff, so that these types of things are rare instead of common, that's being suggested here. So I think both those areas are opportunities for us to plug some maintenance and plug some staff needs.
Mary, would it be all right if Lisa commented very quickly on the status of where John is with the utilization of the resources that already exist?
Yeah, I'm happy to add, Jen. You said it very well. Thank you. Just to sort of operationalize what Jen was talking about a little bit earlier about the shift in sort of preferencing certified staff. How that ended up looking in schools was it ended up looking like smaller caseloads for cross-categorical teachers when we made that shift. And when we did an analysis of the workbooks and we took a look at the equity charts, and we're going to be coming back to talk to you about this in November around staffing, we noticed that principals actually made the conversions that they wanted to out of flexible special ed teacher into SEA. In many cases, they converted from EA into SEA in their workbooks. We did not see a lot of further conversions based on need in the workbooks. Usually if principals, at that point in time, now know that the workbook's in January and there's a difference, right? Caseloads and total numbers can shift. But John's monitoring multiple times a week with his assistant directors to address the needs that are out there. I will say that projections, because John does projections for special education by school, and the furthest that his department was off on projections was 7 students, and that was at one of our comprehensive high schools. So our projections were really accurate. That said, Dean, to your point, it's the needs of the kids that you want to get right. Numbers don't tell the whole story, and sometimes little ones that come through transition, they're crossing levels, middle to elementary, elementary to high school. It's one of the reasons we're really concentrating on transition. Those are the places that we're really going back now and taking a look with our assistant directors at what some of our most challenging kids' needs are and how do we need to make adjustments there. We're looking at schedules, we're looking at kids' schedules and at grown-up schedules, and really looking at that service delivery to make sure schools have what they need and are using the staff that they have in the best way possible. So John and the assistant directors are working regularly on this. They assured me today they have ample resources in their flow-through and in their budget to make adjustments as needed, and are working with principals and problem-solving pretty consistently across the district.
Anna?
Yeah, so just going back to this new service delivery model, I was at the Leadership Institute where this was rolled out by one of the speakers. And so just some feedback for you all. One reason I think it's highly problematic at the high school level is the model that was proposed really is based upon 2 premises: smaller class size and inclusive settings. So this is why it doesn't apply to our high schools, because the settings that families we're hearing from, their kids are in completely segregated classrooms of all students with significant disabilities. So I think it's not going to be an effective model when you're taking all the kids and putting them in one room with one CC teacher rather than a CC teacher and 3 SEAs. So I would really hope that folks look at that. I understand the idea is to create a more inclusive setting at the high school, but we're clearly not there yet. And to jeopardize students' health and safety, much less any academic achievement, I think we might be a little bit more forward thinking where we are in our reality. So just consider that. I'm also a little bit concerned that, you know, I am in the schools a lot. I do hear a lot of things, and to me, it's a little problematic because when I come here, I hear, well, the principals say it's great, the staff says it's fine, or the principals say it's fine, allocations are great, but when I talk with the staff and the families and the kids, they're like, whoa, this isn't okay. So at some point, I hope we can bridge that disconnect so that what our leadership teams and our principals are saying are consistent with what staff are saying and students are saying. Because it just doesn't seem to align when you're out in the schools and in the community talking about what's going on. And I would be, you know, I'm just curious, do we have the flow through dollars to address some of these more acute issues? And I can say it's not just at Memorial High School. This is a systemic thing across our high schools. At the very least, it seeps down into our middle schools.
Yeah.
And so it's not just 1 or 2 families.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Anna. Our principals are not necessarily quiet on these issues. I just need to put that out there. They're very vocal when there's a problem. And we certainly know of some as we speak. I think I'd like to make a suggestion. We've got a week before we make this ultimate decision. I'd love to be able to do a little homework with Lisa on, you know, just where we are with special ed and flow through. I'm not sure that we're going to get it resolved right now, and want to be able to make a more informed recommendation on where, if we were to invest more, what might that be? Is that all right?
I think that's, but the other question I hear is that actually where are we? Not only do we want to invest more,
And
it's
where
actually
are we?
where are we? And
Yes.
do we need, what do we need
If we
to
need
invest?
something,
Yes,
yeah.
what would it be?
Do we need something, and if so?
Before we talk about recommendations, I think
No.
the board needs to have some questions. And
Oh, yeah, sure. I just want to
before
put
we
that
talk
out
about
there.
recommendations.
Thanks, James. So, I mean, I think similar, I wouldn't be comfortable at this point taxing to our full authority with 7 days to think about investing kind of 1% of what we essentially as a district have to spend, right? We spent weeks and months discussing increments of $20,000 earlier, and I know we all have both perspectives on what else we could do, and certainly heard lots of things from various stakeholders in the district on what else we could be doing. But I just think it would be a disservice to take 7 days now and commit such a significant portion of our funds. Now, that said, I do find value in smoothing increases, and I do think that is helpful to have our community kind of expect a certain thing over time. So TJ, your suggestion on taxing and banking some portion is pretty interesting to me. I also think it helps, from my perspective, there's sort of 3 big investment areas that we all keep circling around. One is around compensation. We have a long process going on around that right now, and a banked set of funds could help us make a bigger step change in 1 year, next year, that we could then easily continue with typical rate of increases. So it actually gives us the ability to make a more real step change. The second is around behavior, and I don't think anyone in this room knows the right way to spend or invest kind of money to support that at this point, but it's going to be an ongoing topic of conversation over this year. And then the third is around creating kind of instructional differentiation for children at the margins, if you will, so special education as well as advanced learners, and we keep coming back to these 2 cohorts. And how do we enable kind of creative instruction and differentiated instruction, because children are different and teachers are different, And again, that could involve some pretty significant investments around structure. So those three things, I feel like we have an opportunity this year to come back to, and the banked in particular for compensation is just a very good mathematical structure to support that conversation. So I wouldn't want to go all the way on that, but something would be interesting.
Nikki, actually, since James hasn't spoken yet, would you
yeah,
mind we
absolutely.
go?
Sorry, I didn't see her have a chance.
Yeah, it's quick. Mike, we've had some discussion here talking about the tax levy for next year and how it may jump. So can you help me with that one, how we are able to, or what are the variables that allow us to talk about the likelihood of the tax levy jumping next year?
The following year. Sure. Just two factors. And the first is a little speculative, but it's based on the idea that we could lose up to 15% of our equalization aid. And that would be about $7 million. And the second factor is that the community gave the board the authority to increase the local tax levy by $8 million. So that's a combination of $15 million of tax impact on about a $300 million levy. So that's about 5%. So a little over 5%. Now there's a lot of assumptions in there. It assumes that you would use all $8 million of your authority next year. It assumes that you'd have a 15% aid loss. It's possible that this number could swing, a full percent downward. But I wanted to at least give you a sense of it, and that's for today. That's about as far as we can go.
Okay, that helps me. So, and we were also talking about the tax levy trend. Now, isn't the trend, you have the trend indicated here from 2012 to 2017, am I looking at that right? That is the trend for the last 5 years, 6 years? At 1.75 and 12, 3.38, and isn't that the tax levy trend from that? That's okay. So it's not really a consistent linear trend in my observation. So it has been down, it's been up, it's down a little bit. So when we talk about a trend, I would say that's sort of curvilinear. It's not linear. So I'm not sure what we're looking at. So just my observations. I won't comment at this point on what I think we should do with any extra money or anything like that, but I just wanted to. Okay. So thank you.
Nikki?
I just wanted to, turning on my mic, I just wanted to go off Anna's point on the whole inclusion issue. I just want to provide the services in a way that we're not setting up our kids to fail, and that's the biggest thing with inclusion. Inclusion doesn't mean just putting everyone in one classroom, but it also doesn't mean that we can always do absolutely everything all at once. That doesn't mean that the kids don't deserve it. That doesn't mean that they don't belong and that they should be included in every step of the process. But if we don't have the staff, we can't truly provide adequate inclusion. And I know that's controversial, but at the same point, if we're going to do the best for our students, I think we should at least strive for it, even if we can't 100% achieve it.
TJ, I'm going to ask a clarifying question first. Mike, on the on a levy that is not, additional levy that is not spent, that is basically banked or fund balanced, is that included in the calculation of state aid on the expenditures per student that basically then reduces our state aid because we spent more? Is that spending based or is it levy based?
It's spending based. It's a great question. It kind of argues a little bit in favor of the idea of kind of a tax and hold strategy if needed. If needed, the equalization aid doesn't get impacted until those funds are actually spent.
Okay, great, thank you. TJ?
I'm trying to figure out where to start here. I'm going to start with, I guess, responding to Anna, that like Anna, I've heard primarily things around high schools, and I've heard concerns from cross-categoricals, SEAs, and families about issues of both safety and learning. And I've also heard some things around 4K and 5K. And those are the two places, and kind of surprised, usually this time of year you hear things across the board. And those have been the two places where I've heard it, and I've heard 3 different high schools and, I don't know, a handful of elementary schools on the 4K, 3K things. And that there's, and some of this is that, you know, as you've noted, that John has things that he can plug in at these, and I think that some of the 4K things have happened that way. I'm not sure it's happened at the high school level. Okay. But I think that, you know, the response to you don't know what a 4K classroom is going to be. You don't know how these interactions are going to manifest themselves till they actually manifest. And I think so. The 4K, 5K stuff was very early. The high school stuff I'm hearing continually. You know, at a personal level, I have a friend who was on workman's comp for 10 days because she was injured by a student. And so, you know, the safety factor is real. To Kate's point about that we spent, you know, months working on this and things, doing last minute additions is never the best thing to do. And I clearly recognize that, but there's also kind of a competing way to, which is that, are we confident that this will improve the experiences of our students and staff? Is it not confident that this is the best way to improve them, but are we confident that it will improve them? And I think that some targeted investments, I think that we can have that confidence, and maybe, you know, maybe if we were given 6 months to analyze what would be the best way to spend, you know, $500,000 or something, this wouldn't be where we'd go. But we're here with a week, and it's difficult, and, you know, some of this has to do with state budget timing and all those, and we do have this opportunity. And so I think that in addition to the question that, you know, is this what we would have done had we had months of lead up, we also have to ask, are we confident that this will improve the experiences of our students and staff? And do you want to respond to that? I have more to say, but just, you know, you can respond. Go ahead.
Why don't you
no, I mean, I'm happy to get into dialogue. I want to throw a couple of things out there. Is that I agree with Jen that we need to know what John has banked right now in terms of allocations and how to use them. Additionally, I asked for a updated version of the chart on page, I don't know, 43, 46 of the budget book. And one of the things that the version from the June budget shows a decrease of 13 SEAs total. And I don't know what the current status of that is, whether that is greater now or less. And I think that kind of information, both what John has banked and then the longer term picture about, you know, what have been the trends in this case for SEAs, or even if it's just 1 year, maybe it's not a trend. But what is the status on that? Mary, those same lines caught my eyes on the and, you know, and I emailed a question about it, and there's a couple factors here, one of which I'm not sure about. One of which is that we have the 3.26 step lane and base pay increase, which is going to bump those, and that's the same increase as we have in June. So that doesn't explain the June to fall one. That does explain the 2016-17 to 2017-18 largely. 2016-17-18 on those lines is a little less than a 5% increase. 3.26 of it comes from step lane and base. But I asked Mike, and Mike said that the majority of that, the vast majority of that June to fall budget increase in those lines around instruction, around undifferentiated curriculum, and were a reallocation from the anticipated employee. In this email, I can read it here. The June budget anticipated 12% employee premium contribution as part of the state budget, so the personnel costs in these large staffing areas was significantly reduced in the June budget. We had reduced the personnel costs by over $5 million due to the 12% employee premium contribution requirement. The $5 million was set aside in a holding account and was going to be put into additional salary to make up for the 12%. However, when the 12% requirement was dropped from the state budget, we reallocated those funds to the holding account back to the major personnel lines. And so my understanding is that that's the explanation for the increase in the instruction between June and fall. And that's, I mean, because those are the same lines. Those are the lines that do the $3 million increase in instruction. Is that correct?
Yeah, it sounded a lot more convincing when I was writing it.
I believe it.
No, it's actual, yeah, and I think I may have misunderstood Mary's original question. But if you're looking at why are those lines increased from June to fall, you simply need to look at the offsetting line, which is other support services down there lower in the report. You'll see a big negative.
And that was, yeah.
So we had this holding reserve for this crazy required 12% employee premium contribution. And when we reversed that, what happened? The personnel costs went back up. And you're seeing that reflected here. And I think my point to Mary was there was really not much in the way of FTE change from June to fall. There was a dollar change, though, and it's really an accounting correction.
I think that was my point, too, with
Thank
some
you for
numbers
helping
woven
me.
in.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the
And
opportunity
yeah,
to
that
clarify
other services account was at 1.10 million in April. So yeah, that function as a holding account. I guess finally, I appreciate the interest in the idea of banking and doing that with some portion of this. And I guess, we're at a point where I hope in summation that further information on staffing and what's available before next Monday, obviously. Number two, I think that developing, some sense of what does banking look like, what does spending look like, and having that information before us so that we can make the best use of the little time we have would be and yeah. And I guess that if board members have, and this includes me, if board members have concrete proposals they would like to see analyzed, I guess that we should get those in as soon as possible. Because it's Monday and we got to vote next Monday.
James?
Yeah, and I'm going to second that because I really don't want to get to Monday and then we spend 2 hours trying to discuss ways to spend money on the stage. So if board members have some suggestions, I hope we can get them in soon enough so that they can come out by Thursday, Friday, and board docs so we all can look at it because that doesn't work very well when we try to work these things out at full board meeting.
I mean, could I make an even different suggestion, which would be,
I
mean, I'm not sure, I mean, isn't this the moment to make suggestions?
Yep.
And I think we've heard one, which is the question to be answered, which is, what do we have banked on SEAs, and do we need more, right? So there's one question.
Yep.
And then the second question is, do we want to bank something more for larger moves down the line?
Yep.
For me, compensation is an obvious one to use that for. But those are the two questions that I've heard to bring to the table on Monday.
That's what I was taking away
Along with
too.
some maintenance.
Yeah, along with maintenance.
And maybe we should talk about the maintenance one, because actually none of us have spoken to that.
Right.
AJ, did you have?
I just had one other question, and I know last year when we were sorting through the budget, we had set aside money for innovation. And where did we end up on that pool of money?
Yeah, it's in the TID 25 budget. There's a $200,000 line in TID 25.
So that's
which we're not using for anything in particular yet.
Okay.
But remember, Ricardo presented here on our Opportunity Youth Project, which is something we're really hoping to use some of those funds for.
And would that need to be determined by next Monday, or it's just going to?
It's in the fund.
And so, or if any other proposals came forward for that money, it's there? Okay.
So, as to what decision will be made next Monday, would we have to decide then exactly what the money will be used for, or just how much money will be like taxed eventually, and then either banked or spent on something? Does that have to be made on Monday, or no?
The tax levy decision must be made on Monday night. By statute, you have to have that done by November 1st. Now, let's say hypothetically the board decided to increase the tax levy by $10. I'm just rounding you could either A, say those funds are there is no expenditure attached to those revenues, in which case it's sort of a tax on hold, or you could specify a purpose, personnel, specific personnel, compensation. or you could simply leave it as an undesignated dollar amount.
TJ,
Here's the follow-up clarification.
no, actually, I'm
Oh,
going to
sorry.
speak.
Okay.
I don't put my hand up for me, so I have to just interject when I am going to. I think it is important, we have another agenda item after this that is looking at the next year's budget. And I think it's important to take this discussion in the context of some things that we're going to see in the next one. And any additional money we spend, we know this, basically costs the district 50 cents more. So for every dollar we add, we know we're going to lose not only that dollar, but 50 cents in state aid the following year. So so I think that this issue of not only what we have available and what we need, but also what our needs are going to be the next year, and whether we are going to have the resources to be able to address issues there. So, TJ, one last point, and then I'd like to move on to the budget issue. I think that what we have not heard that there's any other significant ideas to be considered. I think what we have heard from the president is we really don't want to make next Monday's meeting a open, here are all the different things to consider, but keep it very narrowly focused.
It's just an expansion on Mike's answer to Laura, which is that if we don't designate an expenditure line for it, and we later want to move it to an expenditure line in the DPI one, it would be a 5-vote budget amendment that would require an amendment, a 5-vote, and so that's just a clarification on further.
Okay, so Jen and Mike, you have enough direction going for next week? And for questions to be answered in the meantime?
I think so, and maybe we can circle back to that one last time after this part, to your point. It might help us refine our thinking about what we want to do in the short term, if everyone knows where we're headed in the longer term. So I'll pass it back to Mike to walk you through our thoughts on the calendar. Mike, I don't think we should go through every single month, but if you could do kind of those 3 or 4 bullet points, like the big highlights. I'm going to assume everybody had a chance to scan the calendar that we're proposing. So Mike, why don't you highlight what's different about this year's budget calendar?
Happy to do that. Okay, so in your budget material, in your board packet, there is a very simple, almost a sketch of a budget timetable for next year, and we're using that as an opportunity to introduce our ideas on how we would sequence the major segments of work for next year, and what the priorities are, what the points of emphasis would be, and really how that would differ from last year or the year before. So I guess, Jen, rather than going chronologically through the entire process, let me give you maybe the 4 or 5 big concepts that are built into that. First, use November as your idea generation month in the front end of the process. And that means, in particular and especially, the compensation strategy and the staffing and class size strategies. So, not to be necessarily decided in November, but we're going to use the instructional work group and the operational operations work group as kind of a 2-part conversation to get at those 2 big issues. Okay. Secondly, we're going to hold back a little bit on the strategic priority actions. Those had been early in previous budgets, but because the strategic framework discussions are just getting rolling, and remember this is about next year, it seems to make sense to let those ideas percolate and then bring in the priority actions in maybe second half of February or March. We wanted to indicate that, and we've already said this a little bit, that compensation, we think, is the lead foot for next year's budget. It's an area that we have been waiting to get at for a couple of years now, and we think strategically and financially we're set up to do something about it, and that's going to be the variable that affects all the other variables, and we really want to lead with that and focus on it. And once we have a strategy, it'll make it a lot easier to round out the rest of the budget. Related to compensation is our benefits strategy. And our intention here is to have sort of a steady state on the benefits plan design, as opposed to prior years where it was a major focus in the budget. There is a corresponding financial implication to that, which means you have to set aside a certain amount of money to fund that plan. But with that in mind, we want to put that in as a steady state item. That was an applause line, by the way. And then I think also maybe the last major point would be that the revenue forecast for next year, 18-19, should be quite easy to do. We know all the big variables already. It's the second year of the state budget. And again, thank you to the community for passing the referendum to give us extra levy authority if needed. It creates a very easily defined revenue picture that we can work from. So those are the big ideas, and we were hoping really just to kind of use this opportunity to get your comments, and then we're going to build out a real budget calendar after tonight's meeting. That do it? Yeah. All right.
So I think that we should talk about whether people have any other questions about this. I know we heard that that in the process in the past that maybe we didn't talk about some of the bigger issues that were strategic priorities or items that were going on with the budget. And here I think what has been prioritized is having that alignment in the November meetings where you're talking with instruction work group about staffing, class sizes, summer school, and in operations about compensation, that are really the major parts around variables, things that might change in the budget, and get those discussed, that then are inputs into the budget and can help formulate that. Teacher?
Yeah, I appreciate moving staffing and compensation up to the front, and I think it's really important, and I think that we will do a better job, and we will achieve some more clarity and make some better decisions because of it. I have a couple concerns. Is that I think that either January, maybe February, that we're going to have feedback, some kind of consensus around staffing and compensation coming out of November, maybe into December it might take. I think that come January or maybe February, I'm not sure, we're going to get some look at what that looks like in practice. We're going to have more information going from theory to practice with that, and I think that scheduling and understanding that there needs to be a check-in there with that is going to be really important to make sure that those issues don't arise at the end again. So January would be my preference. I always like to do things earlier, but it might not be till February that we can actually know what that looks like based on enrollment projections and things like that. But I would strongly suggest that. And the other thing I would suggest would be some clarity on a timeline and decision-making processes and perhaps votes around the priority areas and the priority actions. And I think one of the things that happened with the priority actions this year was that there were like 3 or 4 different categories of priority actions, and some of us weren't quite sure what were what in terms of what are the big priorities. What, it was the ongoing. And so I think that again, as early as we can, to get those either woven into the budget, set aside temporarily, or rejected. I think those are the 3 things you can do with them. Is you can say, yeah, build the budget around that. Put that in there. It can be, I like it, but I want to see how everything fits together first. Or it can be, you know what, this is not on the agenda this year. And I think that having some process where relatively early, where at least that level of decision making can happen around the priority actions would be helpful. So those would be the 2 places where I have suggestions. And again, much appreciation around putting compensation and staffing / class sizes at the start.
Mike, one thing we had talked about briefly in a very high-level scope was with regards to knowing that the state budget is, we know what that picture is. We don't know exactly about equalization aid. We have a good sense that health benefits are, we are going to be very unlikely probably to be able to hold the line like we have been the last 2 years on that expense. And so when you take basically what we know about the state budget, what we know about just step lanes and inflationary increase, along with health benefits, the amount of money that's left, possibly the range in this pool, when we talk about compensation, we talk about class sizes, we talk about whether it's middle school start times or compensation strategy. Those are big buckets, or some of those are big buckets, and yet that amount of money is actually not right. I mean, it's a big number, but those are, as a percentage of those areas, it's really fairly small. So I wondered if there is some context for the board around what we had briefly discussed that might shed some light on that. Again, getting back to these budget decisions, because what I took away from that preliminary discussion is it's going to be a tough budget to make these investments in additional areas next year, given some of those factors.
Right. At the staff level, and Mary saw a preview of some of the early work we're doing, we're working with pie charts, right? We're working with an assumed revenue scenario, which I already mentioned. James brought it up earlier, and then trying to fill in those slices of the revenue pie, or the available additional resources pie. And I think we were working with $14 or $15 million as a scenario, and there are many scenarios. Far too early to get locked in on any one, but we were trying to plug in our standard compensation, additional compensation strategies. What about additional staffing? What about the benefits piece? What does that leave for priority actions? And we were just playing with these different pie slices, trying to figure out, what's the best way to move forward. And that's going to be part of this November and front end of the budget type of work. And I think it's essential work for the board to engage. Happy to try to facilitate it.
One more comment.
Yeah.
I just want to say, as you work with those pie charts and things, we're very good, and most elected officials are, at adding things. Sometimes things need to be stopped. Sometimes it's time that we've done something for a long time, or we piloted it, and it's time to say, you know what, this is not an investment we need to continue. So I hope that that's part of
absolutely
part of the play that goes on. It's much easier to add, and I think that comes to our next discussion on core values. Is that it's so much easier to be in favor of things than it is to be against things.
Right. Some of the major moves we've made in budget have been through reallocation. And I think the health insurance last year was a major shift into salary. We have to find new versions of that, right? It can't just be on health insurance every year. Yep. And so, yes, I totally agree with that idea.
Yeah, and I do think that the voice of the average consumer should continue to be heard, and we know that incomes have not been rising very fast at all. We know that most incomes have not been rising at 2% a year rate. So when you look at the 6-year trend here in our tax levy, we've done a fairly good job, a couple of years above 4%, but this is cumulative. And so it does impact the average consumer. And so, I annually have to take that into consideration. On an individual basis, maybe some people around the table feel very comfortable with the increase in the levy. But I know that there's a lot of people out there that support our schools, but, you know, really look for us to make sure that, you know, we're responsible and not increase that levy and their taxes too much. So I always try to look at where is that balance. It'd be great to have all the things that everyone talked about here today. It would be great. But I do respect the fact that incomes aren't increasing at the rate of over 2%. It's just not happening. And so I always want to take that into consideration when I think about where we are with the tax levy.
Okay, so that concludes our last item, and I will make a motion for adjournment.
Can I just very quickly make sure I have the right takeaways?
Sure.
I appreciate keeping it narrow. We're going to do a little homework on the SEA status and to what extent would we need something in addition. We're going to take a close look at this concept of kind of putting something aside, not for spending for this year, especially with an eye towards what we might like to do on compensation. And we'll, I didn't hear a lot of love for the maintenance idea, except for Dean was like, yeah, let's look at maintenance. We'll take a look at that as well, and we'll come back to you with a proposal. If the board chooses to do something different than just decrease the tax levy, what that middle ground might be. Sound good?
Yes.
All right.
Okay, I'll move to adjourn. Second?
Second.
Thank you, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned.
When's this meeting?
to call this part of the meeting tonight to order, and this is the core values discussion, continuation of the retreat, I believe, or these core values was first discussed and drafted, and so we're here tonight to continue that discussion. And so I'd like to turn it over to Jean to get us started.
All right, thank you, James. Kate is actually going to lead the bulk of this portion of our meeting. I just wanted to say a couple quick words. I want to thank you for the board retreat that we had earlier this month. We missed you, James. We, at that meeting, shared this general timeline of what we're going to do with the strategic framework rewrite this year. And got some great feedback on that process for this year, all of which has now been incorporated into our plan, and we're off and running. And we began the actual process by diving into this discussion about core values. As a reminder, the process that we're going through this year is year-long. It's basically broken into two big segments. The first half of the year is a lot of kind of opening up the conversation, right? What might we do in the next phase of MMSD? Listening, learning, talking to a lot of people, kind of generation of ideas. In the second half of the year, we want to move into a phase of narrowing in on our direction, really getting into the nitty-gritty of planning. The board is engaged in this process. At least we've scoped out the first half in great detail. About every month, the board is doing something as it relates to the strategic framework rewrite, so I thank you for that. And then we'll figure out in detail what that's going to look like in the second half of the year as we get closer. As a reminder, the strategic framework, the way we presented it at the retreat has these components. The vision, goals, and core values are really about kind of setting the, kind of creating the parameters, right, for the work. And this is where the board's work is heaviest, and Kate will talk a little bit more about this momentarily. The board confirmed at the retreat that the vision statement is going to remain. The graduate vision itself will continue to be strengthened based on what we hear and learn this year. It's evolving. The board started its work on core values, and in December is going to be diving into goal setting, which will be really important. The stuff in the middle, which is more about the specifics of strategy, the board will certainly play a role here, advising and guiding us on strategy, but the administrative team will be doing a lot of heavy lifting, the nitty-gritty of strategy itself. Kate, do you want to say a little bit more about this before we get back into the core values discussion?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that sums it up. Maybe just from a timing perspective, since this is the first time we've kind of spoken about it in this room, we're sort of starting at the top and working our way clockwise around the outside, and that really our expectation and hope would be that we as a board are able to provide direction and guidance to the strategic framework by the end of this year, confirming that at the beginning of next year in February at, I believe, an instruction work group, TJ. So vision remaining the same, and then values and goals really being the two components that help provide direction. Goals and metrics being the quantitative and kind of more concrete version, and values being the more kind of philosophical values and guiding principles that we as a board agree that we want to hold our district to, the ones that we want to embody and hopefully be something that our students, our staff, our families can go back to as we make decisions, and that we can go back to as we make decisions. I mean, actually, the budget conversation is an interesting one to come off of, because it really should help us to make those investment and prioritization decisions as we go into budgeting. So that's the kind of hope and intent. we can, I don't know, do you want to say anything more, or do you?
No, I'll just say one quick thing, Kate, actually. And that is that at the retreat, I did offer up, kind of as a provocation more than anything, some words on what I had read in my little research online about how core values can help drive decision-making and actions in any organization. And based on discussions with the senior team, heavily informed by the senior team's retreat this summer, we offered up some original ideas, some fodder to get the core values discussion going. The draft that Kate is sharing with you today was not actually built off of any of the core value statements that that I put on paper to get the conversation going. It is a complete, fresh rewrite based on the board's discussion notes, and was actually drafted by Kate. So thank you for that. Yeah,
it's very much intended to be a draft. I mean, look, this is our opportunity to build from the work that we've done over the last 5 years. I mean, maybe stepping one step back to just the framework overall. What we've learned, what we want to continue to do, what we want to do differently, what we want to stop doing. What we want to try. So this is the first moment, and it is going to be an iterative one. We've got over 50 sessions planned through the fall. Many of those are existing standing forums. Some of those are new that Jen and her team will be leading primarily, but that all of us are invited to, and I hope that we get to at least one or two, just as an opportunity to get feedback from the community, test out some of these, continue to iterate, because it is a pretty kind of lengthy listening process. So this is not the final discussion, and the draft that's out there is sort of our draft too, but it's I would say going to continue to evolve. I did want to just start because there was a set of values in the strategic framework for the last 5 years, there still is. And I actually just went back to them myself just to kind of ground us in where we are and as a foundation for where we might want to go. And I'll just read them because we don't have them on a page, but they're clear, and so they're sort of split similar to the ones that we're talking about into ways of working or how we work and visions of where we might want to go. So from a ways of working perspective, we've got clear and sustained focus, continuous improvement aimed at results, and schools at the center. And then great teaching and leadership matter, and a culture of excellence with equity. And for me, actually, there is a very much kind of consistency in some of the discussions that we had at the retreat, and what I took a stab at writing down here in terms of excellence as a continuation of excellence with equity, voice as kind of the seeking the new version of our family, youth, and community engagement, which was a piece of the existing strategic framework, courage around creativity, innovation, and evidence-based strategies, belonging, coming out of a lot of our dialogues around relationship building over the last several months, and then trust again. So there's sort of that blend of ways of working around trust and courage and voice, as well as kind of goals around excellence and belonging. From a facilitation perspective, I know we've all had a little bit more time to mull in this. I was going to start by just kind of going down the list and getting kind of additional thoughts and input, and then maybe at the end we can talk about any adds, subtractions, etc. Yeah. So I was going to start with excellence. Any kind of thoughts there?
So you're asking for comments or input on the value, the excellent value?
And I think keeping in mind that the way we hope to hold these is as something we can go back to through the strategic framework process to align ourselves and make prioritization choices around what that plan ultimately looks like.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Now, if we agree on these core values and everything, it doesn't limit us to other things we can discuss. It just sets these up, correct?
Yep.
Just wanted to make sure.
Yep. It's like a North Star, right? Similar to maybe the way that we'll use metrics as a quantitative goal.
who's running? You choose? Okay. Yeah, I don't have, I've read it several times, and it's still whirling around up here. But as far as process, to answer a question of one of our speakers today, this is going to be vetted in these sessions as well. So there'll be plenty of opportunity for people to participate in developing this. This isn't just a board thing that we're going to do. So, yeah, I don't have a problem with anything on here, but I don't love it yet. And it seems too long and a little too wordy. And that's my first reaction. And I only have a couple edits that I'd make along the ways at this point. So it's still whirling. And that's the best that I can do. When we get to the areas where I added a couple words, I'll offer my suggestions, because they change a little bit how you think of it right away. That's all I got.
TJ?
You said that we've had time to think about this. I probably had too much time, and I probably had too much time. And I'm trying to edit myself as I go. But excellence is one of the ones here that I'm kind of in some ways. First off, I appreciate that you included the students develop core competencies, because I think that captures some of the things that I was trying to say at the retreat. And I think, we use this word excellent, and I was kind of reflecting on it this weekend, and I think about how many people who I've met who are truly excellent at anything. And I think we overuse this word excellent. I know people who are very good at things, but excellence is to me, and I think that in some ways we cheapen the word. And I can count on two hands the people who I've met who are actually, I would actually say we're excellent. Maybe I have high standards. I don't know. And in part, one of the things I wrote down here is that we need humility, as well. But going on that, so. Two other kind of comments related to this. One is that I think that with some of these you do it and some of them you don't, but all of these that, this last sentence is kind of nice, that we recognize and build upon the cultural and linguistic assets, talents, skills, and abilities of our youth. I think we need to add community and staff to that. And I think there's a couple of other places where you do similar kind of constructions, and to understand that it's our students who are at the center, but if we're talking about our core values, they're about not just our students, but about our community and staff also. The other thing is that and this goes back to this notion of excellence, that when I think about, trying to frame, the word competence is not a good word, but I think capturing this idea that where my values are and where my priorities are, and, we're talking means or ends, we're talking values versus priorities, but that, some sense, I'll go Christian, that the least shall be first. That those students who need the most, who are having, who we are failing with the most, those students, if we're talking about absenteeism, those students who are in the, I don't really care about average attendance. What I do care about is the number of students who are missing 10 or more days. That, that my priorities are that is that we should, as a district and a community, first concentrate our efforts where the needs are greatest. And I think excellence in some ways, as a word, distracts from that. It doesn't contradict it, but it does distract, and it does distract from it. That we're seeking excellence, and who aren't we giving the hand up to as we climb, is the question. The National National Organization of Colored Women's Clubs had a motto back in the 1880s, 1890s, and the motto was "Lifting as we climb." And capturing that kind of thing where, we need to climb towards excellence, but we need to have that hand up lifting people on the ladder, and that lifting comes first for me. So that's my comments on excellence, and a few other things.
wasn't my issue with trust. It didn't seem like that. I don't mean to parrot one of our speakers. However, I thought it before, and that is trust is earned, and it's one of those things that I don't think is dividable. I just don't. And I think it's something we all strive for. I understand integrity. I could see that as a better word. But to truly trust someone is something that's almost undefinable in a true mission statement.
Integrity was on my list. I just wanted to comment to Nikki that my list of 15 possibilities here, integrity's on there.
TJ's going for making it shorter too. So do you want to stay on the last one for a second?
Are we going all over? I thought we were going down the line.
We were, but we went to the last one, so do you want to stay on the last one?
Well, if we start something, we should finish. And
So
I don't
other
have anything to
comments
say. No, I just got lost.
I guess, does anyone have anything else to say about excellence?
I don't think so.
I like excellence. I mean, who doesn't? But and I think that it's. I like how it's written, and TJ, while I personally agree with what you say, I also find that that we have 27,000 students, and that there's and that is a lot of families and a lot of care that people bring to their relationships with our schools, and I feel a commitment to that we are providing excellence in our schools to all of our students, and that may mean that it does take additional attention and resources to those who may need it most. But I'd have to see how it's worded and what that value is, that ensures that our values are inclusive of all, not only our 27,000, but how we meet. I feel schools are very much a part of the fabric of our communities, and we play a role that goes beyond the students that we serve, the families that we reach, and I just want to make sure that we're being. I personally want to be attentive to feeling that everyone sees themselves as feeling that they belong in our set of values and in our district.
I think Kate captured a lot of that in the belonging value here, and I think extending that beyond just to community and staff again, beyond students. But I think that was actually the ones you did that was, and I agree that when you do say that our attention first goes to those who need it the most, that you do risk alienating other people. There's no question about it, and sometimes I think that if we talk about what the purpose of a core value is to give people the basis and the backbone to say, you know what, this is who we are. This is who we are, and we're not neglecting your child. We are not neglecting your concerns and your interests, but we are going. We are focusing first where we are most needed. And I mean, I think that's, you know, public education is for those, is, you know, for some people it is supplementary to the advantages they have. For other people, it is the source of opportunity. And I think that recognizing that difference in our values is important. And you know, I mean, and I don't think excellence contradicts that. I think it just, but I do think that if we don't have excellence balanced with something along those lines, that it does distract from it.
I mean, one thing I'm not going to respond with that, but with regards to our staff, I think that's one thing I don't feel. And I know when I drafted what I felt were, the staff was really core. Like, it's a value to realize that our ability or let's say students' abilities to learn, that the relationship with our teachers and our staff and our schools are at the core of that. And I think it does drive priorities. I think it serves a fundamental purpose if we say that is, and that the health and well-being of our staff needs to be part of that. So I personally almost believe it's a separate value. I certainly believe it, and I hope that we can call that out.
Dean, did you?
Yeah, I think my initial reaction here was that some people may consider excellence to be equal to perfection, and it really isn't. It's in the pursuit of perfection, we will become excellent. And that wasn't me, that was Vince Lombardi. And
Excellent quote.
you know, you keep working and working and working to perfection, because perfection is a moving target. Once you get somewhere close to it, you realize you can do better, and that's excellence. So I think it's a good. Is it spelled right?
I don't know, hopefully. That would be embarrassing, but.
Maybe that's what's spelled.
I mean,
is that C supposed to be in there? Maybe, I don't know. Anyway, but.
That would be kind of classic.
It's, so I think it's a good value to have, because it's not an absolute. Excellence can move.
For me, this one is partially about believing in all of our students and the commitment that we will believe in all of our students, irrespective of if they, where they stand in relation to opportunity right now. And so for me, it's actually the objective, the goal is less important than how we approach our children, and that we believe in the talents and kind of gifts of all of our children. So, and I think I'm seeing some nodding heads, and we can probably take a stab at rewording that. And again, I think the words will continue to evolve, but yeah, yep. James, did you want to add anything? Were you?
Well, I always have a problem when I start looking at things like all these qualitative statements. I think we do a good job with these. I don't have anything specific to add. I have to look at it a little more. But I think, historically, we always do a good job. We always end up with some good qualitative value statements, these core values. And I just wonder if we should have a core value on something that always dogs us. And what always dogs us is implementation. Everything we do, we come back to, every time we look around, when we hear people talk, it's like we go out and have good intentions, and we have all these great values and all these great approaches, and then at the end of the day, someone say, well, we just not implement these things, right? I don't know if even implementation, if it can even be a core value, I don't know. But it's something that seems to always dog us. And I just wonder if we need to put it in somewhere, or at least have a core value around implementation. But it's an area that I think we need to really focus on and talk about, how we get better at implementing the things that we do. So that's my comment on all of it.
Yeah. No, and I think, I mean, TJ, certainly some of your comments and Mary's yours as well in terms of ways of working ties in with analytical implementation, evidence-based. I think that there's a theme there around how we approach our work that maybe we can combine a little bit differently. Do you guys want to take up voice?
I like to be really sort of explicit and yeah, talking more about being implicit. Really talk about getting better at implementing the things we do. And really be explicit about it.
Go for it.
I have a minor edit. In order to make great decisions, I think we should put "we will" instead of "must."
I think there's a lot of people beyond youth, families, and staff of color who feel that their voices are not given opportunities. And I'm concerned that the way this is phrased is simply exclusively those of youth, families, and staff of color.
Yeah.
And I understand the emphasis there, and I'm not objecting to the emphasis, but the exclusivity. And I think that, you know, in this, I'll check off 2 others from my list of my 15.
Yeah.
One of them is that I think that something's missing here is the role of schools in creating social cohesion and a sense of the common good. And I think that, and I'm going to resist reading a Dewey quote I also brought about, but when a society allows for the free exchange of experiences and ideas and common experiences, that this is a democratic and a good society, is the summary version of it. And I'll send it to you via email. And I think that there's a sense that you know, to capture some of that with, you know, with calling out especially those whose voices have you know, but to combine that, because I think that creating, I think that we need to be working at creating cohesion and not division. And I think that the way this is phrased has the potential to do.
Yep, it's a great call out.
To divide.
Yeah, absolutely. And TJ, just your comments on kind of cohesion make me wonder if we don't go back to the last one and talk. I mean, Mary, I've heard you talk about community and the roles that schools play in our community. We could, there's something there around kind of the fabric of our community or the cohesion that we could build in.
Cohesion's kind of a, I don't know. It's kind of a Marxist word or something, I'm not sure. I don't know. No.
Unity. Any other comments on voice?
Just unity. I would add the word unity. It's just a united vision. As TJ said, there are a lot of people. I'm not just diminishing, and I don't want to be seen as diminishing people whose voices have been not represented. I just think that if we do it as unity and community, I think it helps more. But if it weakens the statement, then I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I agree that this is a divisive statement here. When I read,
sorry, go ahead. I was just agreeing with you. Sorry.
Yeah, in order to make great decisions, we must seek out and elevate voices. To me, that's an all-inclusive statement right there. Then it goes on to just talk about maybe some voices that we have not heard from or don't hear enough from. And so I'm not sure this is, for me anyway, it's not a voice isn't divisive. You know, I guess when I look at the work we do, I guess I always have to remember the backdrop of who we are. And I think sometimes it's important that we are reminded of who we are, how we're viewed nationally, the issues we've had historically, and to not call out some of those issues. I don't know why we don't, because others are calling them out for us. They're telling us who we are and what our failures have been. And so I think sometimes we need to be explicit about we talk about marginalization, and so I think it's a good word. I'm happy you all decided to include it. But I think it's a good, I don't have any improvements to the statement, but my main point is that I don't think it's divisive.
Can I change my opinion a little? Hearing that, and this is something I've struggled with, and this is where I struggle with it, and I would like to include everyone, but we haven't done enough. And for that, I can see why we need it the way it is. I can see that. Because we haven't done enough. I'll openly be the first to admit that.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and I guess with that statement, like youth, families, and staff of color, I almost think that's too vague, because I actually think that when we look at our data, we have a very specific group within that broader context that has not been served well in our district and continues not to make adequate progress. So I guess if we're going to call out what other people are calling out already for us, then that to me seems a little bit.
So you're suggesting that we make that more specific for the students that we are currently failing, so African American students, students with disabilities, is that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, I just.
Well, I mean, I do think that's the conversation. I mean, if we want to go that way, that's what I see when I look at things going on in our district, where I see other groups making gains, additional supports and resources, but that's not happening, I think, across the board.
Go for it.
Yeah, I just see that there's Latino families that don't feel, and I think it's, I think when we say that it's those who voice isn't being heard, that aren't being reached, that don't have the supports necessary, that there's no doubt that our biggest challenges certainly are around race and students with disability, but I wouldn't say that that's the exception. And I think that every single day in every single classroom, the message I'd like to send through values are that is that every single student is one in which that sense of belonging is important, that relationship is important, and that our staff strive to have the support and the skills and the cultural knowledge to be able to create those relationships. And so I'm concerned again about the creating divisiveness in our values rather than creating the cohesion, while still being true to what we believe is needed to reach all of our students.
So I think for me in this one, there's two parts and probably not articulated very well. One is around the idea of targeted universalism that we talked a lot about earlier and based our equity tool kind of work on, which maybe it's a jargony word, but it's a word that for me holds the tension between cohesion and our obligation and responsibility to deliver a great education for everyone in our district, while also supporting students who need different or more resources differently. And so that's kind of piece of it. But the other piece of it was just around action, that it's actually our obligation to seek out and make sure that that everybody is at the table. So those are the two pieces that I was trying to articulate here, because I'd heard both of them, and they maybe both shouldn't live there, but TJ, you're grimacing, but.
No, I'm thinking as I listen, so that's the grimace.
So I kind of wanted to separate those two things. You had your hand up.
Yeah, I
before
guess
anyway,
that,
so.
that, you know, partially in response to James, and which I've been thinking about longer than I've been thinking about what you said, is that, I mean, I think that, you know, that as it reads now, it says, in order to make great decisions, we must seek out and elevate the voices, influence, and leadership of those who've been most marginalized in the community. And I think that it doesn't say including those who've been most marginalized. It says those are the voices we need to elevate and the only voices we need to elevate. And it's not an inclusive statement. And I think that, you know, I'm fine with in order to make great decisions, in order to whatever. I mean, great decisions that's fine. We must seek out and elevate the voices of all in our community with particular attention given to the influence leadership of those who've been most marginalized. I mean, to me, that's, you know, but the balance needs to be there.
Yeah.
Because some of it is that I don't think we do, I don't think we do a great job. I think that we have is that I don't think we do a great job reaching out and elevating a whole lot of voices in our community. I mean, there's some people we do and some people we don't. I think we have a lot of people who are well positioned to make their voices heard.
Yeah.
But even then, you know, the opportunities are perhaps not, could be enhanced. So that's my take, is that it needs to have an all or some kind of statement, and a statement that recognizes where we need to give extra attention.
I mean, I agree with that from the standpoint that I think it's fine to make it explicit that everyone needs to have a voice. And I don't know how anyone could disagree with that. It's just that the reality of it is that we always hear from people. We have always heard from people around this table. We always have. And I think we know who we hear from. And so I agree. Let's see if we can figure out a way to make that explicit, that everyone, that this is for everyone. I don't, like I said, I don't think anyone would disagree with that. But the issue has been those we have not heard from and that we don't hear from. That's what the issue has been. There's always voices around this table and in this community. And for me, what this statement says when I read it, and that's why I believe it's always good to have different perspectives around the table and then people from different backgrounds, because when I read this, what this says is that we hear from everyone. We hear from all these people in our community, but we rarely hear from this group of people. We need to hear from them more. It doesn't say that we're not hearing from certain folks. I think it says that we're hearing. So I agree, let's make it explicit then, if it's not. But for me, it's explicit because all it's really saying is that let's make sure we hear from everyone. And that's the way I interpret it, that we need to hear from everyone. This group of people we don't hear much from. And actually, we've had that conversation around the table quite a bit, especially when we look at our surveys. You know, I can point to board members around the table who've made this point, that our surveys are not representative of the people that we serve. And so that's what this is saying to me, is that let's make sure that we hear from some of those folks. And so it's not saying that we want to eliminate anyone. It's saying that we already have everyone except this group of people. So how do we get those people to the table? To me, that's the way I'm reading the statement.
And I'm sorry, because I know you took time, but is this value voice? To me, part of it is to provide an opportunity to have your voice heard, but the other thing is actually to have your voice impact change, and how do we develop voices so they can change.
Yeah,
So
like leadership.
is this leadership? Is this empowerment? I mean, to me, voice is like, that's just like one piece
just
of
the
it.
first
That's
part.
not the core value. The core value is like,
That's a good point.
I'm not sure what it is, but it seems a lot bigger than voice. And I know we hate the word empowerment because now it's become, you know, it's a new robust or whatever, but I just feel like
Voice is huge. Voice is huge. Greet the invisible man.
I'm concerned about how this is being used, and that we're now like an hour into this discussion. And when you go out in your 56 segments, you haven't even gotten to what the strategic plan actually is. I mean, I want to hear from our staff about their ideas on how we can improve morale I want to hear, you know, and I'm afraid this is just going to be a time suck, and you're going to add for, what? Oh, is that bad language? No. I'm not running for governor. Not sorry to say that. So, like how, because we're going to wordsmith this to death, to where it's going to be acceptable to everyone, and then we're going to, and then is that going to be an agenda item to get feedback, and then we're going to put this in front of 56 different groups to then get their input, because we said we were going to get their input. So I just actually don't, I like values, but I also don't see how this is really going to move the strategic planning process forward if we are going to be looking for input on this, because I think you'll get, we actually are not that far apart. I guarantee you, the people at this table, but we still spent an hour, and I don't think we're, and we still haven't come to any decision.
Mary, can I suggest that you just try to power through this list, because I know that last set of core values mattered a lot. I mean, I know from decision-making at all levels in our system, that list that Kate ticked off before we started this meeting have actually mattered, right? The idea of putting schools at the center. While we haven't done it perfectly, it's like in those moments of debate, right? That's when the core values become important. Some decisions are easy to make because the quantitative data is super clear, and you know, you just move forward. But so often you don't have all the information you have to make the best decision, and it's in those moments that you fall back on your core values. So I've got to tell you, the core value statements and the strategic framework that we're still using have mattered a lot. Okay. And I need you guys to come to some consensus on these statements. So I need you to power through. And yes, we'll get some, we'll code for, you know, core value statements through the strategic framework process, and put them in front of some targeted groups. And you'll get, you know, one last round of thoughts to refine them, but they will matter a lot. I've been 5 years in, and we're still going back to those core value statements from the first strategic framework. So I just can't say enough about how important it is.
I think that this is our opportunity to give a lot more rich guidance to, particularly Jen, you probably and your staff, and we are not going to get input on every single one of these in this format in our 50 breakouts.
It's mainly going to be about strategy. I mean, that's what people want to talk about.
It's much more focused on actions.
Yeah.
So go for it, Nikki. And then we'll move on to the next one.
No offense, Jen.
It's just painful.
I respect your opinion, but I got to go with Mary on this one. I'm one of those who's not great with semantics. I just am not more of a doer than less of a wordsmith. It's part of the reason I'm a trial lawyer. I'm not a research lawyer, is because I kind of cut to the chase. No offense, I believe that it needs to be there. I believe we need to have something. The problem being is we are going to argue it to death, and then we're going to have everyone have a different opinion. And I'm afraid of those groups that we will miss the strategy behind.
We're not going to go through this with the groups.
Okay,
We're not going
that's
through all of
what
this.
I wanted to be sure.
No.
So Jen, on the core values, because Kate, when you read them, the ones that, I think maybe the problem is this is just way too long. You know, that they're core values that we should know what a value stands for.
Yep.
Right? And so we shouldn't need all of this.
detail.
So if the core value is excellence for all students, and we hold all students and believe that they can achieve that everyone, whether it is our parents or our staff, has a voice, and students that is heard, that we do have the courage, right? I mean, this is fine, but then let's just
shorten it.
Keep with the core.
The core of the core values.
The core of the core values.
And I don't know that you guys should be wordsmithing.
No, we don't need to wordsmith.
I don't encourage you to do that. But are these at this point in time, are these going to help us drive not just decision making, but actions in the next phase?
I'll go back to my original statement, that I don't have a problem with these, that maybe we need one on implementation. That was my original statement.
Yeah.
So, because when you start the wordsmithing, you can wordsmith forever. And you can do that forever. So, so when I, like I say, when I read these things, it's like, we do a great job. Go back for decades and look at all the publications. We do a great job of putting words on paper. The end of the day is what the results like, and where we get our criticisms around implementation. And so, yeah, we do
Yep.
great with the words.
All right, TJ,
I'm
can we move on to
make
the?
this quick?
Great.
I think like Mary, I would rather be talking about what the priorities are for the strategic framework and what areas we should be doing it. I appreciate that this can have an influence, so I'm going to try and be quick on this and go through it with courage. I think that someplace in there has to be a sense of the courage to say no.
Okay.
This is about the courage to do things, the courage to not do things, the courage to stop things that aren't working. I think it has to be part of that. I think belonging is excellent.
Great.
And excellence is rare. I think Anna's absolutely correct that trust here describes something more like collaboration and partnership. But I do think that this brings up something along the lines of trust or integrity or honesty or some kind of notion with that perhaps should be incorporated someplace. And I think that perhaps if we're talking about partnership, perhaps when we have belonging and voice, we don't need that version of it. There's 2 or 3 other, well, there's 5 or 6 other things, but I'm only going to mention 2 or 3 other things that are on my list in the interest of time. One of which is, I think, the sense of what David Tayak calls the conservationist ethic, which is that when respect for things that are working. That not to innovate and disrupt, to innovate and disrupt, but rather, but understand. I think this also goes to the point of that our schools are working for some people in our community. So I think that in there, I mentioned before humility. I think that we have good ideas, but there's a lot we don't know. I think that maybe this goes to implementation. Carefulness. Care and carefulness is an idea that we do things with care, and that also goes to decision making. That's what I'm going to leave it at. Oh, respect.
Great.
R-E-S-P-E-C-T.
Let me,
You want to go through real quick?
yeah, real fast. I also think that the order is not right. I think
Yeah.
belonging should be first. As far as courage goes, I'm not certain the second sentence is necessary, and I would start it, or rewrite it, the first sentence by saying, to be bold and action-oriented, we will embrace the rest of it. And then in belonging, the second sentence is, it is our responsibility to cultivate relationships. I would insert with after relationships. And I'm not sure how we cultivate community, but we can cultivate relationships with communities and cultures. I don't know how you cultivate a community. They're already existing. So and then change the order. I think belonging comes first. You have to have everyone come to school knowing I belong here and I can do this. And so that might be the first one, and then reorder some of it.
Cool.
That's it.
All right. Any others, Anna? Any other comments?
Yeah, I think some are a little bit wordy.
Yep.
I can broken down. Voice and trust are the 2 values that I'm struggling a little bit with. I'm not sure if that's exactly the value that we want to get across. One value that isn't up there, which I had put forward, was inclusive. And I also think dignity would be something that would capture respect.
Cool. Thank you. James, any others? Any other comments?
No, not this time.
Make stuff work.
Okay, I have something else to add, more specifics than my general rant. With belonging, I just wonder if it should be relationships and belonging, like that at the core are relationships, and whether that's between staff and just relationships with parents and students. That's sort of at the core. And then the thing is with belonging, that all of these blah, 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 blah belong in our schools. I think what's more important than belong, because then that they have a sense of belonging. Because we may say they belong, but if they don't have the sense themselves of belonging, we're missing it. And so I'd wordsmith that paragraph.
Super. Thank you. It's really helpful input. Do you have any?
Yeah, I guess in terms of, I think that if we wanted to reduce the, like, in terms of combining everything that Mary said about how people should know what each of them means, maybe making each of them like one sentence that
Yeah.
captures
Yep.
each of them, rather than having perhaps the like most profound statement that we're trying to make each of them get lost in, and they're not
Yep.
really large paragraphs, but in each of them. I'd also like second the relationships thing, just because I know that was on one of the like year steps, and so if these are very important in terms of making decisions when things are, you know, very like hotly debated and you're trying to decide which way to go, it seems like that would be a good one to tilt towards
Yep.
in times of, you know, those situations.
Super. So the next steps from here, we will try to incorporate some of this feedback and send it back out to everybody. I think the next phase is trying to convert this into goals and metrics, right? So just keep that in the back of our heads as we move forward, because some of these are going to be a little hard to translate into numbers, but I think we kind of need to try. So what do you want to add?
Oh, just thank you for sticking with us. It does matter, and I appreciate the energy and effort and patience, Mary.
Never accuse me of patience.
Seriously, I know. I know better.
Or me. Second.
We'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
TJ did it.
Huh?
TJ did it.
Do what?
I moved.
I seconded.
We're
You're
ahead
still
of you.
chairing the meeting.